打着大的，哦不对，你打的厂牌来着。一请双你在头上飞，高请双你在哪桥头？
这个是超前一百，
阿维图史维亚州位置。
Freezing in here. So.
Long time no see. Miss you a lot.
Long time no see?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been 3 days, hey?
Yeah, 3 or 4 days.
Feels like forever.
Yeah.
Did you have a good long weekend?
Not that great because every day I cannot see you. That just make me feel bad.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's we're gonna do that. We're gonna try the heavy flattery.
Yeah, there without you is boring.
Oh, okay.
Just like the moon without the star.
You know, Crazio, if you wanna kind of butter me up that way, you should just, just back it off a little bit and make it believable, okay? Because
Okay.
yeah, that's probably a bit much.
我跟他说骚话。
I missed you too, but
That's great.
Where is everybody, Crazio? Did they not miss me as much as you?
I don't know. Maybe they just have some special reason, or I don't know.
I cannot imagine a better reason. Let's see now. Okay, well, we seem a little light, but are we ready?
Yeah.
As they say, time waits for no man or woman or anybody. So let's do this. All right. Here we go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, I was going to say Monday, but it's actually Monday in disguise, right? It's Tuesday, but it feels like a Monday. Good long weekend, Yoya? Relaxing? Yeah? It's okay. Crazio, I know you missed me all weekend, so that must have been quite difficult for you.
Yeah.
Jim, how was your long weekend?
Not bad.
It was okay? Yeah? Weather was pretty good on Saturday. Sunday was kind of Yesterday, not so great. Pretty wet. Okay, so Unati is here. Good morning, Unati. And there's lots of people who should be here, but who are currently not. So I'm not sure where they are. Hopefully they will show up shortly. But meanwhile, let's jump back into where we were. There's Daniel. Good morning, Daniel, again. So on Friday? Yeah, on Friday, we were talking about the Roaring 20s, right? So the 1920s, there we go. There's everybody. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6. Still missing about 5 people. Did you see more people? No? Okay. On Friday, we were talking about the 1920s, right? And I had started off talking about this, saying that, if you ever get a chance to go back in time, go to the 20s. It's a real party. It's really exciting. Of course, make sure you go to the United States because it's not quite so fun in all countries. But the United States is having a really good decade. There's lots of technological change. There's lots of social and cultural change. And a lot of the things that we kind of recognize about our modern world actually get started in this period, right? So prior to the 1920s, you know, people don't have a lot of luxury goods, okay? So they just have the things that are essential, right? In terms of clothing, in terms of things that they own. People don't have a lot of stuff, right? Nowadays, we live in societies that have a lot of stuff, do we not? Yeah, there's tons and tons of stuff to buy, right? You could continue buying stuff until you die, right? There's tons of consumer items out there, and this gets started in the 1920s with cars, with refrigerators, with vacuum cleaners, washing machines, and I'm sure to most of us those things don't sound very exciting, and arguably they're maybe not, but it really sort of set in motion a type of economy that we live in today, where the economy is driven more by people's wants rather than their needs, right? So that's kind of how money gets made. We see increased communication technology, and so telephones start to be much more common in this period, so you can actually call people. Electricity becomes more common, and so cities start to get wired for electric lights. And so imagine what this does imagine what would happen in a city where there's no light after dark, right? Would people hang out outside? No, everybody would go home and light candles and just kind of stay close to home. But wiring up cities for electric lights means that you can have people outside at night. You can have nightlife, right? People can, extend their outside socializing hours, right? So it changes that. We have the radio, right? We have the radio that allows people to communicate with each other over long distances immediately for the first time, and it kind of binds people together, right? You know how, have you ever done this? Tell me if you've done this, where you find out maybe someone you don't know very well, they like the same show that you do. Like they're watching the same show on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, and you're like, oh, have you seen this? And they're like, yeah, I love that show. And you know that feeling? You're like, oh, cool. They're like me, sort of, right? You know that little feeling? Yeah, kind of, right? You're like, oh, they watch the same thing. We can talk about this, right? We have a connection. So imagine what happens in the 1920s when radio is a thing, when suddenly everyone in the nation can tune into the big baseball game, or they can listen to the same radio show. There are radio shows, by the way, too, that are just like television shows, except there's no image, there's no video. But people tune into radio shows too. So imagine this new feeling of everyone. It's like, oh my gosh, everyone's listening to this. Everyone's listening to this radio show. Everyone listened to the big baseball game last night, or the big boxing fight. Remember, we saw some boxing fights in the movies. Imagine that now everyone knows, and you can talk to them. Hey, Sophie, did you listen to the baseball game last night? Wasn't that great? Yeah, and so everyone's kind of connected in this new way, right? Because everyone is kind of listening to things and experiencing things at the same time. And again, for us nowadays, that's just not a big deal, right? It's like, yeah, well, whatever, right? Of course, right? We have internet, we have fiber optic cables, we have videos on our phones. Everyone can experience things at the same time. That's just not that interesting, right? But in 1920, imagine listening to the Major League, the World Series, right? Final game of the World Series. Let's just pretend you're into baseball. If you're not, I don't know how anyone can be into baseball. It's so boring, but it's an American thing, I guess. Imagine like everyone listening to the final game of the World Series, and imagine knowing that like everyone in the country is like tuned into the radio, right? Imagine everyone is like hanging on every word to see if your team is going to win, right? There's a really interesting kind of communal feeling to that, and it's a feeling that probably people prior to the 1920s never had, right? Unless you were at a game, right, or everyone was in the same place, but an entire country listening to the same thing at the same time? Unbelievable, right? Technology is unbelievable. And so that would have been huge, right? And so it's an interesting experience, but it also helps bind the nation together, right? As a group of people who are having the same experience. And that's important. Yeah, we see the beginnings of fashions, right? And so fashionable, we have a big fashion and beauty industry nowadays, do we not? Huge, right? Prior to the 1920s, that's not a thing, right? The fashion industry is not a thing before the 20s. But it starts to be as people have more money, they have more income, and they want to spend it on clothes. They want to look good. They want to look fashionable, particularly when they go to clubs and dance and stuff like that. So we saw all those things. This is the cover of Life magazine, which they don't print anymore, but you can see people seem to be having a heck of a time in the 1920s, dancing away. I showed you some marketing, some advertisements here, which again was these sort of big, colorful ads are also new for the 20s. And so here we see selling oats and selling, here's a doctor selling cigarettes, which you won't see very often today. But again, in the 20s, smoking wasn't bad for you. It was cool. Now we know differently. Well, it's still kind of cool, isn't it? Unfortunately. It's not cool? Is smoking cool? I don't mean the official answer, but like, no? Not cool? Okay. Yeah, here we have the Ford plant, right? So all of these brand new Model T cars rolling off the line. Huge change, right? People suddenly can afford these things because they become less expensive than they ever were. But think about how cities have to change. Remember in the video we saw on Friday some of those street scenes? Wasn't that insane? There were these tiny streets and there's like cars everywhere and people are, just about getting hit by cars and they're getting like, it's crazy, right? Because there's the streets aren't made for cars, cities aren't made for cars, there's no traffic lights, people aren't used to looking for them. And so there's a lot of changes that have to happen to cities, to city planning, to society in general, so that people can kind of learn to live with cars, right? Of course, nowadays we're very used to cars being everywhere, but in the 20s that was brand new, right? And people were still learning how to deal with this technology. Right? The other thing we mentioned was credit, right? So there's lots of credit going around. Prior to the 1920s, if you wanted to buy something, you just saved up. And if you couldn't save up, then you can't afford it. The end, right? But then we have credit, right? We have buy now, pay later, right? Monthly payments. This is kind of the way the world is nowadays, and this kind of starts in the 20s. As we read about in the text, it gets them into trouble a little bit with the stock market, but we'll return to that a little bit later. So we watched this, we watched that video just to get a little window into what the world was like, right? Because really prior to the 1920s, we don't really have much in the way of video footage at all, right? So even in the 1920s, video is quite new, right? There's not a lot of people shooting video at that point in history. So the stuff that we saw is pretty interesting because it's kind of the first video footage that we really have of, of the past, right? That's the first kind of evidence that we have. So just refresh my memory before we go on here. What kind of social and cultural changes did we see in that film? I think we've covered most of the technology stuff, but what kind of social and cultural changes were happening in the States? Too long ago?
think people socialize more.
They socialized more?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Andre. I thought it's so hard with the mask, right? Because you're like, okay, and then you're like, oh no. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Andre, what were you saying?
The thing for the people have things to talk about.
People had things to talk about?
Yeah, because I feel like before they would have talked about a lot of things, but with all these technology things, boys they have to say, oh, you saw this and that. You didn't just go there.
Sure, it was yeah, it was an exciting time in terms of things to talk about, right? Yeah, what else? What else did we see? Social changes, social or cultural changes. What about women? What was happening with women in the 1920s?
What's
What's
the wrong with it?
what?
What's the wrong with it?
What's wrong with it?
No, with the women. I mean, the-
Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong with them, but I mean, what's happening for them? How are their lives changing?
In the movie, they were pretty happy.
Yeah.
A little bit, and they were like celebrate day by day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were like drinking all day, celebrating, dancing.
Well, probably not all day, but you know, it wasn't 10 years of drunkenness, but I mean, but it was a big change for women, right? Because prior to that, women's place was in the home, right? And
Yeah,
so
they were cooking and they were doing the clothes with that whole stuff to draw the clothes.
yeah. So women were still in the home,
Yeah.
but they had lots of technology to help them, right? Like washing machines and vacuum cleaners. But also their life outside the home had changed as well, right? They had money, they had jobs, they were getting their hair cut short, scandalous. They were wearing dresses that showed their knees, scandalous, right? They were out dancing and drinking and smoking out of those long plastic things that women smoked cigarettes out of. Right? Shocking, scandalous behavior, right? But it was a period in which women sort of were empowered, right? They got a lot of power back. What was going on with booze, with alcohol?
Was it legal?
It became illegal.
Illegal.
Yeah, it became illegal at
And
one
the
point.
mafia was
Yeah, they had to make people own.
yeah, and the mafia were also on the road, so they did it like secretly.
Yep,
And the people that understood, they started to make their own
yep.
alcohol and yeah, their own whiskey, all the drinks.
Yeah, so
Types.
alcohol was banned in a lot of places, but that didn't stop people from having a good time, right? So they would make their own. They would have little speakeasies which were hidden away that, you know, you needed a password to get in.
The emergency drink.
Well, yeah, so you could, yeah, so even though it was illegal, liquor was illegal, there were still lots of places to drink if you know, as long as you knew somebody, right? And then there was the mafia who stepped in to kind of try to control the supply of alcohol, right?
The black market. It wasn't the black market where they
Yeah.
sell the.
Yeah, it was a black market for it. It was underground kind of, right? And yeah, and there was lots of gang wars, right? There was lots of people getting killed trying to control the business, right?
Yeah.
Anything else going on culturally or kind of in society?
Did you mention the car?
The cars?
I mean, how the craziest thing when they were driving on the road.
I know.
think we mentioned
Yep.
the clothes.
Clothes.
Were also pretty different. I mean,
Yeah, people were dressing, you know, again, before the 1920s, you had your regular boring clothes that you wore every day, and then you had your Sunday clothes for when you go to church, right? That's what you had. But now there's fashion, right? People are wearing all kinds of different clothes just to look good and just to be fashionable, right? That's new. That's brand new for the 20s. Okay, let me just see what my next. Oh yeah, okay. So let's put a pause on 1920 for a minute, and let's go back to World War I. So when World War I ends, okay, yes, the war ends. Yes, the map of Europe is redrawn. Yes, Germany gets screwed over in the process, but we'll deal with that in a little bit. The other thing that's happening in this period that's super interesting is change in political systems. Right, Daniel? Right, Jim? Right, Crazio? You with me? Okay. So the change in political systems, because prior to the 1920s, there's kind of two systems of ruling a country that exist. Do you know what they are? Let's say in 1900. What kind of political systems exist?
The states, every state was alone, and I don't know how to say it, but it's like every state was like for their own country.
Yep.
It was like for example, Berlin was like for the whole country, and the other side was also like one country. So because they were like
Separate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Separate.
Okay, so we kind of have every country kind of in it for themselves, if you will.
Yeah, every country like has its own government. Like that's
Very true. Crazio, did you want to? Okay. Okay. Let me help you out here. So, in the 1900s, it's a world of empires, right? And most of those empires have some sort of king or queen, right? A single ruler who's in charge. And what do we call that? Starts with an M. Yeah, monarchy, right? Mono is one. Actually, it comes from Greek, right? Mono is one. Archon is ruler in Greek. So you have mono-archon, monarchy, one ruler, right? So England has a king or a queen sometimes, right? There's a king of France at one point. That's earlier though. There's a Kaiser in Germany, right? So many of these systems are monarchies. They have one ruler. And then we have our democracies, right? So again, France at this point is a republic, and so it's a democracy. The United States is a democracy. Britain has a king or a queen, but they have democratic elements as well. But those are kind of the two systems. But as we get into the 1920s, we get two brand new political forms appearing. Brand new, never seen before. Okay? So these are kind of the three that are in play in the early 20th century. Okay? Three kind of versions of how a modern country should be run, right? Traditionally, it was monarchy. You had a king or a queen or a Kaiser or a Shah or a something, right? Some kind of, a what? No? Oh, okay. You had a single ruler. But here, in the 20th century, we have new forms of political organization. Now, we should look at this just to help us figure out how these different systems relate to one another. Have you ever seen anything that looks like this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's good. I don't like that arrow that says fascism that's pointing to me. I don't really like what's happening there. That's an accident, I assure you. So Crazio, you've seen this before. Where have you seen this kind of thing before?
Socialist class.
Socials class with Miss Jamie?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you learn about this in socials class?
It was that kind in just a rich country, in which kind
Yeah. So it kind of helps us understand, how countries rule themselves, right, and what they value, but it can also tell us how people think about their country, okay, and their government, okay? So, all right. So let me explain this to you. So we have a left wing and a right wing here. Have you ever heard those terms before? Yeah, we hear that a lot in kind of modern discussions, right? People on the right, on the left. Oh, the radical left is trying to do this. Oh, the radical right is trying to do this other thing. We hear about it quite often, and this is what they're talking about, okay? And in general, what they mean is, what they're talking about is how people think the country should be run and what the role of the government is, okay? What is the job of the government? So let's start with the left, okay? So if you are someone who is on the left, or you have kind of left sensibilities, or if you just support left-wing things, what that means is that you feel that the government should have a significant role in people's lives, okay? So people on the left tend to like it when the government helps them out, okay? So governments that provide social programs, pension plans, disability pensions, maybe free university, right? Maybe a government that offers lots of supports for people and protects the environment. All of those things are generally left-wing ideas, right? Because the government's kind of interfering in your life a lot, okay? They've got lots of rules and regulations, but there's also lots of support, okay? So think about this like your parents, okay? So you may have parents that are kind of very supportive and they're always checking in with you and they want to know every little thing that's going on in your life and they're always there for you, right? Okay, and this is kind of what left-wing people want out of a government. They want a government that's always there for them, okay? In an economic sense. But people on the left wing also feel that government shouldn't involve themselves in people's social lives, okay? So what they mean is that people on the left wing are usually very accepting of diversity. They're very accepting of multiculturalism and immigration. They're usually accepting of people of different sexualities, different genders, if people are transgender. People on the left are more accepting of that because they feel the government shouldn't really pay attention to who the people are. They should just support them, whoever they may be. Okay? Sorry, Crazio, did you have a? You can. It's not posted on student portal yet, but if you tune into YouTube, you can see it on my channel, or you can come closer if you want. Yeah. I don't have a link handy, but if you type in my name into the search thing, you'll see me come up. I'm very popular.
So in Teams, you will find the link in Teams.
Or in Teams, yeah. I'm very popular. I have well over 53 subscribers.
I'm one from them.
Okay. Okay. So far so good, all right? The left wing, they want very supportive government, but they're very open to people socially, okay? They're very accepting of all kinds of different peoples, religions, sexualities. It's all good, okay? If we go over to the right side, we kind of have the opposite relationship. So in terms of economy, people on the right like it when the government stays out of their lives, okay? They don't want a bunch of social programs telling them what to do and when to do it. They don't want high taxes to have to pay for all these things. They think people should take care of themselves, okay? So again, think of your parents, right? Some people might have very supportive parents who look after them and, take care of everything for them. And then there might be parents who are a little more hands-off, right? Are you okay? You good? Okay, let us know if anything's wrong. And so, they love you, right? And they're supportive, but they let you be a little more independent, okay? And so that's kind of what people on the right want. They want a government that lets people be independent and lets people take care of themselves. Okay? So, you know, fewer regulations, fewer social programs, lower taxes. That's what they're interested in. Okay? But at the same time, people on the right tend to be more interested in who the people of the country are. Okay? So people on the right tend to be more traditional minded. They want to preserve tradition, right? They want to kind of keep things where they are. They want to make sure we preserve our culture, our way of life, right? We want to maintain our history as a people. That tends to be more kind of right-wing ideas, okay? Does that make some sort of sense? So yeah, so people on the right are kind of more interested in who the people are. So as a result, they tend to be a little bit less accepting of different genders, different sexualities. Sometimes they're a little more opposed to immigration. Sometimes they're against abortion because they are more religious. They tend to be more religious. So there's kind of two opposing sides here, okay? Now, if I asked you, you don't have to tell me, because that's all right, but if I asked you, could you kind of put yourself on this spectrum? Could you say, well, kind of based on my beliefs, I know where I fit? Yeah, and I think I do too. You know, I think I'm probably in the sort of lightish green area, somewhere between liberalism and socialism. That's kind of where I sit. Maybe I'll throw in here too. Often you'll see this play out in a few different ways. So often older people tend to lean more to the right. They tend to be more conservative, more traditional. Older people tend to go a little bit right, not always. Younger people tend to go a little bit more left, okay? Not always, but sometimes. In most countries, you'll find that people who live out in the countryside, out of the cities, they'll tend to be more on the right. People in cities, in urban environments, they'll tend to lean a little more left, okay? Again, not everybody, these are just general patterns. What was I going to say? If you looked at Canada as a whole, Canada leans a little bit left, okay? If you looked at the United States, I think they lean more toward the right on average, okay? But again, it's difficult because things are becoming, Sophie and Andre, are you with me? Do you want to share? Do you have any? Because I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I've never heard anyone who's at the center.
What's that?
I've never heard anyone who's at the center.
You at the center?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what's happening, right? Is that, you know, all around the world we're seeing that things are becoming more polarized, right? People who are on the left are leaning further left. People who are on the right are leaning further right. Very few people seem to be comfortable in the middle anymore. But the other thing to realize is that in reality, most people are in the center, okay? So, sorry people at home, you won't be able to see this, but I'm gonna stand up. So, if you're a political party, right, and you want to get elected, let's say I'm a liberal party like Justin Trudeau's Liberals, right? So I'm going to be on the left, but do I want to be way out here? No, because most people aren't that extreme, right? Most people are kind of like, yeah, I lean a little left, or yeah, I lean a little right, but not much. So most political parties are going to be sitting right in here, right? So here in Canada, we have a Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is like almost dead center. So they're kind of socially left. They are, actually at this point, they're economically left as well, but they're pretty close to the center. And actually, Justin Trudeau's Liberals, I think, have leaned a little further left than most Liberal parties do. Our Conservative Party in Canada, they're a little bit right, but not much. Our NDP party is maybe just a little bit more left of the Liberals, but not much, right? So most political parties they stick really close to the center because that's where all the voters are, right? So you could start a communist party in Canada, Of course, you wouldn't have to because we have a Communist Party of Canada, but there's like 300 people in it, right? Nobody in Canada is interested in communism, right? So the further out you go, for the most part, the fewer people there are out there, because most people's views just aren't that extreme, right? Most people are like, yeah, I'm pretty okay with how the country is, in Canada anyway. Pretty okay with how the country is. Maybe I'd like a little more of this or a little less of this, but most people are really right in the center. And so most political parties, even if they're left, even if they're right, they're not far off the center. But in recent years, we have seen people becoming more polarized. They're leaning more heavily right or left. And the Republican Party in the United States, they're starting to lean pretty seriously right, which is frightening, I think, right? Because they're almost leaning into, well, they're not at fascism yet, but they're way more authoritarian and anti-democratic than a typical conservative party would be. And I don't know where that's going, and I don't know where it'll end up, but it is concerning. So again, when you get to the extremes, you'll see that that's kind of how it works, right? So if you go all the way left to communism, you'll see that, yeah, the government is entirely involved in people's economic lives because the government owns everything, right? And the government runs everything. And there's only one political party. And so everything is kind of owned and taken care of by the state, right? In a pure communist system, everybody works for the state, right? So they're fully involved in people's economic lives. But a lot of communist systems aren't too worried about who people are, right? They're not really worried about, they're not really worried so much about tradition or people's social lives. And in fact, a lot of communist systems are trying to get rid of tradition, right? Tradition has to go because communism is the way, right? Fascism is different, right? Fascists tend to be a little more relaxed with the economy, but in some cases they're very interested with who people are, right? And so if you look at Hitler, which is what you were thinking, I think, yeah. If you look at Hitler was so interested in who the people were that he was trying to purify the German race and exterminate everyone else, right? So again, that's a very extreme example, but you can see he was very interested in people's social lives, right? As it turned out, he had a lot of control of the economy as well, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So anyway, that can kind of help us to kind of understand these new versions of modern political systems, right? So again, you can have a democracy that is, a little more conservative or a little more liberal, or even a little bit socialist, right? So here in Canada, we have free healthcare, yes? Yeah, that's a socialist idea. And it was proposed by a socialist party that we had at the time, which of course, because the Americans lean right, that's why the Americans are so freaked out about, having a healthcare system, because it's a socialist idea, right? But you mention it to some Americans and they're like, ugh, they get freaked out. But yeah, that is a socialist idea. So democracies tend to live in the middle of this. Sometimes they're a little more conservative, sometimes they're a little more liberal. And then the further out you go, you tend to move away from democracy and you tend to move into a system that is authoritarian, right? Where there's one party or one group that is in charge, right? And so fascists, as we'll talk about, tend to have one strong leader that's in charge. And again, Hitler is the stereotypical example of that. And then communists tend to have a single party in charge, right? So you've got Communist Party of China, you've got the Communist Party of former Soviet Union. You tend to just have one group in control. So as you move to the extremes, you kind of lose that democratic element, right? Because again, most people's views are just not that extreme. right? Most people are roughly in the middle. But governments can take these things to an extreme, as communist governments have, or as fascist governments have. Does that help out a little bit? Does that make sense? Does that align with what Miss Jamie taught you? More or less?
Yeah.
Yeah? Are you confused about something?
No.
No? Okay.
What about the dictator regime?
Well, dictators tend to be. This is where sometimes it gets confusing, because, on a spectrum like this, we're not talking about dictatorship versus democracy, right? Because on that kind of scale, yeah, democracy would be over here, right? Everybody, people have the power, and then on the other end, it's like, oh, the people have no power. It's all the leader, right? But on this scale, you can have dictators on either end, right? You can have fascist dictators, or you can have kind of communist dictators. And so on this one, it's not a difference between authoritarian and democracy. Democracy is kind of in the middle. That's where democracy lives. But the further away, the further extreme you go, it kind of moves away from what most people want, I think. And so you tend to have, the further out you go, either left or right, the more people lose the power, and it falls into the hands of a party or a single person. Yeah. Which is what happens in this period of history, right? So again, democracy is a system of government where people make the decisions, right? So either people vote on everything like they used to in ancient Athens, or we elect people to vote for us, right? And that's kind of the way most modern democracies work. We elect people, those people go to the capital, and they vote for us, right? They make decisions for us, because we're all very busy, right? We don't have time to make decisions on everything. So one of the things that's important about democracy is that the rule of law is supreme, right? Nobody is above the law, right? We pass laws, and then they apply to everyone equally. If I go out and murder someone, allegedly, and if Justin Trudeau goes out and murders someone, allegedly, we're both going to be treated the same, right? Because murder is just as illegal for me as it is for Justin Trudeau, right? And he should be treated just the same as me for breaking that law. Of course, he's going to have much better lawyers, and it's going to be a different thing. But in theory, no one is above the law, right? Not even the Prime Minister of Canada. Again, we usually see democracies paired with capitalism, right? Capitalism is a system where the companies and the sort of things that are producing things in a country are owned by regular people, right? For the most part. Not everything is. For instance, Canada Post. Canada Post is owned by the government. Air Canada is partially owned by the government. TransLink is partly owned by the government. But for the most part, most businesses are privately owned, right? So that's democracy, and I think we're fairly comfortable with how that works. Now, communism is brand new in the 20th century, okay? And it's kind of invented in the late 19th century by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, okay? Now, before I get into this, do you want to take a break now? Yeah? Crazy? Your head's full? Or you just want to take a break?
I just want to go to the washroom.
Okay. All right. Let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we'll talk about what communism is and then what fascism is, because obviously we need to talk more about fascism because it's an important part of 20th century, okay? So take a break, and I'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay, and we're back. So, we are looking, I'm just going to go back a few slides. We're looking at this political spectrum, right? Because in the early 20th century, we have kind of the emergence of two brand new political systems, okay? And that's huge, right? People have been, ruling, as monarchies, kings and queens for thousands of years, right? And then we have this democracy thing which appears. First in Athens, notably, but then later in France, right, as a result of the French Revolution. And so we have democracies, we have monarchies, and then we have these two brand new systems showing up, okay? And so we said democracy was, we have the power is in the hands of the people, and the rule of law is supreme, right? No one is above the law in a democracy, or at least no one should be if your democracy is functioning properly. Communism is different, and so communism comes out of the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And so, did I have a, oh, I don't have a card. I have a card maybe in another slide, or another slideshow that has his picture. Karl Marx is kind of an intellectual. I believe he is a German, Jew. He's a Jewish person living in Germany, I think. He's hugely influential, okay? So if you take other courses like psychology or sociology or anthropology, you will hear about Karl Marx again, okay? He's difficult to avoid in social science classes. But he is also kind of the founder of another political system. And he founds this political system by writing two books. Okay, he writes Das Kapital, and then he writes the Communist Manifesto. And he writes it because he lives it prior to World War I in the time of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so at the time when all these, steam engines are being created and factories are springing up, people are working in factories and all these things are being produced in places like Britain and France and Germany. And he sees this happening and he says, well, okay, we have this capitalist system here, but he says it's exploitive, right? So if we own a factory, okay, so Jim and Crazio and Daniel and Yoya and Andre and Sophie and Mahmoud, you are all employees in my travel mug factory, okay? We make travel mugs at this factory. So I'm going to pay you all I'm going to pay you all $12 an hour to make travel mugs at Mike's Travel Mug Company, okay? So let's say that we have a really good year and we sell a lot of travel mugs and the company makes $1 million, right? $1 million profit, very good year. But who gets the $1 million benefit from that? The owner does. I do, right? Do you guys benefit from it? Well, you get to keep your jobs, right? You get your $12 an hour, but do you really benefit? No. Who benefits from your labor? I do, right? Because that's the way capitalists works, right? I'm the owner. To the owner go the profits, right? And Marx here lives in the late 1800s, and so he sees a capitalist world where people are working very hard. So they're working like 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. There's no such thing as labor laws yet. There's no such thing as health and safety standards yet. So people are working very hard, very dangerous jobs for basically as little as owners can try to pay them. There's no minimum wage either. That's not invented yet. So Marx says, this is an exploitive system because all of the profits go to the owner, right? And the workers are exploited, right? And so he called these two the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And so in this example, you all are the proletariat. I am the bourgeoisie, right? And Marx says what you need to do is you need to have a revolution, right? The proletariat need to realize that they are exploited, and they need to overthrow the bourgeoisie and then take control of the means of production, the factory, so that all of the proletariat can share in the profit of their labors, right? That's fair. That's not exploitive, right? And that was his basic idea, right? Capitalism is exploitive. The people should own the means of production, whether it's a factory or whatever, and everyone should share equally in the benefit of their work, right? Very simple. And so he wrote this down in his 2 books. At the time that he wrote it, nobody really cared that much. Marx wasn't very successful during his life. I think he was like sleeping on people's couches quite a bit. And so, you know, he wasn't a big deal when he was alive. But after that, he becomes a very big deal. Right, and so I showed you that, or I explained that already. And so he says in capitalism, these 2 groups are constantly in struggle, right? You guys, the proletariat, you always want more money from me, and you want easier working conditions, right? Less hours, maybe more safety, maybe more perks. Maybe you'd like some coffee in the break room or something like that. So you guys want easier work for more money, but I want to pay you less and get you to do more, right? And so we're kind of in this struggle, but we both need each other, right? In a capitalist system, because I can't work my factory alone. I need people to work it, but you all need jobs so you can feed your families, right? So we need each other, but we're kind of constantly struggling and pulling at each other, right? You're pulling for more money and less work. I'm pulling for less work or less money and more work, right? And so we negotiate it if we have equality, right? But in this early industrial revolution period, we don't. Marx says this is exploitive, and you know, you need a revolution to fix it, okay? And so, as a bit of a spoiler alert thing, that's going to be very important to the history of Russia, right? Because Vladimir Lenin, who will become the first kind of leader of the Communist Party in Russia, he will read Karl Marx's writings, and he'll say, this is what we need to do, right? We need to bring communism to Russia. And of course, as you know, he does, right? But it's because of Marx's writings. Now, fascism is a different thing. Fascism is a different animal, and it's difficult to describe kind of what it is. Do you know of any countries that are fascist countries right now?
Syria, for example?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I might call. What's that?
Turkey?
Turkey, yeah, it's not a full fascist state, but it's kind of,
Something.
it's getting there. Yeah, Turkey might kind of lean over that way. What else?
There's a lot of countries actually.
What's that?
There's a lot of countries.
Yeah, there's a lot of country. Belarus might be kind of fascist at the moment. Did anyone hear about the incident involving Belarus this weekend? No. Apparently, a Ryanair flight in Europe, flying from Athens, Greece to Lithuania, landed in Belarus after Russian agents told the crew that there was a bomb on board. Once it landed in Belarus, Belarusian agents came onto the plane and pulled a journalist off who had been involved in organizing the resistance against Belarusian President Lukashenko. So they basically hijacked the plane to get this guy off so they could arrest him. It's a wild story. Anyway, so fascism is difficult to describe, and it's difficult to describe because it's sort of a political system that gets made up as people go. Okay, communism has some very clear ideals of what it is, and Karl Marx kind of lays them out in the Communist Manifesto. Fascism is kind of something that evolves on its own, okay, and it kind of, again, fascist leaders kind of make it up. They make it up as they go. And so a lot of what fascism is defined by really what it is against, okay? And so fascism here are governments that oppose all of these things, okay? So they're definitely not right-wing, they're not liberal, they're opposed to pluralism. Do you know what pluralism is? What is that?
Kind of, I understand the meaning.
Yep.
How should I say?
It's hard to describe.
Kind of, I actually don't know what, but I heard the idea.
Okay.
But maybe you can.
I can help you out here. Yes. So the pluralism is a society with kind of lots of different people in it. So yeah, Canada is pluralistic. We have lots of different ethnicities, races, cultures, religions, right? It's a society of difference, right? Fascists don't really like that. Fascists like societies that are pure, that are the pure people, right? Whatever nation you're talking about. They're opposed to individualism, right? They're opposed to egalitarianism, to equality. They're opposed to cosmopolitanism, which is kind of like, like a new fashionable, decadent kind of way of life. Okay, so what's going on in the U.S. in the 1920s is very cosmopolitan, right? Lots of drinking, lots of dancing, lots of fashion, lots of relaxed social rules. Fascists don't like any of that stuff. They're opposed to democracy. They're opposed to monarchies. They're opposed to oligarchies, which is rule of a few people. And so they kind of oppose a lot of things. And sometimes they're difficult to define because, again, they don't have a clear kind of organization to how they go about things. The way that fascism appears, and we'll see this very shortly, is when democracy starts to break down. Okay? So what starts to happen is, as monarchies start to dissolve and democracies appear, some of those democracies don't work very well. And we'll see this in Italy, and we'll see it a little bit later in Germany. And it kind of shakes people's faith in democracy, right? When your democracy is not working, people start to question it, right? They start to say, is this the best way, really? Can't we do things another way? And so fascism kind of preys on people's frustrations and fears, okay? Fascists are usually, they look forward and they look back, okay? So fascists are very interested in the future, okay? Creating kind of a new, bright, technological future. But they're also very connected to the past as well in terms of tradition. They're usually led by a charismatic leader, okay? Somebody with vision, somebody with force, somebody with the determination to make the country great again, right? It's a bit of foreshadowing there. And so fascists kind of look forward and look back. You know who's a great example of a fascist, a movie fascist, is Red Skull from the first Captain America movie. Has anyone seen that one? Yeah. Red Skull, and of course Hydra is kind of patterned on the Nazis anyway, but Red Skull is a great example of a fascist, right? He's a single leader with kind of bold determination. He's focused on his goal and he doesn't care what he has to do to achieve it. He's very technologically minded, right? He's trying to use technology to create a new future. But he's also kind of very uncompromising in his views, right? There's really no room for alternate views within Red Skull's way of looking at things, right? he knows the way forward, and anyone who opposes him will be destroyed, basically. And again, it's no accident that he's like that. Hydra is patterned on the Nazis, and so it's not surprising that Red Skull is a classic fascist. So, again, fascism winds up on the far right of our spectrum here. And so, again, fascists are very rooted in tradition, okay? And again, in some ways, they feel change should be treated with caution, but in some ways, they want to make changes, right? Because somehow the country has faltered. And this is important too, because fascists always have a story that they try to tell people, okay? Daniel and Jim and Crazio, are you with me here? Are you sure? It's okay. Daniel, are you with me? Daniel? Daniel! Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is very important because fascists always have the same story that they tell. The details vary, but the story pattern is the same. Okay? Here's the story. Once we were great. We were a proud nation, country, civilization, whatever. Once we were great, but then something happened, and we're not great anymore. But I will make us great again. Okay? That is the story that fascists tell over and over and over and over again. Again, the details differ, the country differs, the time period differs, but it's always the same story. We were great before, something has happened, and now we're not great, but we will be great again, and I will make us great. It's always the same. And so one of the people who kind of kicked this into gear is this guy, Benito Mussolini. Okay? So Benito here is an interesting character. He kind of looks like The Rock a little bit in this picture, but kind of grumpy. Right? Sorry, Dwayne Johnson. I didn't mean to compare you to him. As you can see, he's around in the early part of the 20th century, and he's going to be the head of the Italian Fascist Party. So he's going to gain control of Italy as a fascist leader. Again, he's going to establish a dictatorship within Italy and kind of rule it as its single leader. Again, he told Italy this very thing, right? That Italy was once great. Of course, if you look back, you have the Roman Empire to look back on if you're in Italy. Once we were great, but now somehow we have fallen, right? But I will make us great again. Okay? So what I would like to do, just with the rest of the class here, is just take a little look into who this guy is and some of the kind of things that he did and how he came to power in the first place. Okay? Because he will be important in understanding what happens with Hitler, and he'll also be important in understanding how some other political leaders operate as well. Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do is just read this section of the textbook. It's only 2 pages, okay? And it's only 2 pages, and there's, how many questions are there? And there's just 3 questions at the end, okay? So I'll give you, I don't know, maybe 8 minutes to do that, which should be enough. It's a very short passage. And then we'll talk about the answers to those questions, and that will lead us into another activity that has to do with critical thinking and stuff afterwards. But first of all, let's just deal with Mr. Mussolini here, okay? So the text pages that are there, I'm just going to dump this into Microsoft Teams if you don't have a textbook or if you are an online person. Let me just do this here. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay, you can go ahead and start reading, people, and I will try to find this. Oh, here it is. I see. Okay. Should be in Microsoft Teams there. It's called Italian Fascism. Okie dokie.
Did you post that on?
I posted it in Teams, and it should be there. Sorry, online people, we had a fire drill, so we had to go outside for a little bit. But as you can see, class is kind of over. So I guess we'll have to leave Mussolini till tomorrow. This is where you all say boo and oh darn, and I wish we could talk about Mussolini right now. But okay, so that's all for today. I will see you tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Au revoir.